Hello and welcome back, and if you've followed this channel in the past and watched any of the videos, and I'm flattered if you have, you'll know that I've got a near medically worrying degree of interest in the world of network attached storage, private data ownership. This channel, although it covers lots of different things, my two main areas of interest have always seemingly been network attached storage and trying to do it in the most accessible way possible. There are plenty of channels out there and plenty of editorial platforms that are jargon heavy and a little bit techy, but ultimately can get the job done. But maybe this is your first entry point into the world of NAS, moving away from cloud, and you're trying to do it in the most seamless, easy way possible, but also doing it while saving a bit of bunts. And that's what today's video is about. Today, I want to talk about this. This is the FanX, the X3 indeed, from the brand FanX, a brand that we've talked about a few times in the past for their SSD and storage devices. This is a device you connect to a pre-existing system that you already own, old or new, and turn it into a modern NAS. Now, this is a prototype model. The device is arriving on Kickstarter soon, and this isn't really a review for two reasons. Number one, it is sponsored by the brand themselves, something we've already put there with a lovely little button that YouTube provide, but also because it's not finished. This is a preview, a prototype review. We're looking at this device and see what it can do now, what the brand is promising, and ultimately whether this thing deserves your money and your data. Now, the FanX arrives at less than wallet size. What exactly is the impact on your wallet? Well, the earliest pricing you can get with a deposit system there behind Kickstarter is $99. That does go up to $109 with an RRP reported at $169 there. Again, this is Kickstarter, not traditional retail. There is a 512 gig and 1 TB model priced at $199 and $279 respectively, which is around $10 to $20 less than if you go for the standard pricing, and then of course higher down the road with the RRP. Now, inside, if you get the non-storage model, which is the one I've got here, this device arrives with an ESP32 series controller inside there. That's a system on chip, SoC, that's largely associated with like smart home, IoT devices, effectively a low power system management there. It's also got Wi-Fi connectivity as well. And that's really it, with an output USB-C that is data processing and power delivery, and an LCD screen there at the front with a reported support of NFC and a control button there. Now, during the prototype testing of this, I will say that the software revision I was utilizing didn't really give me a huge amount of control and utility of both the NFC and the physical button. There didn't seem to be any touchscreen, although it does light up when it's in use. But its main selling point here is that you're using old systems and clients that you've got knocking around and then converting those into a NAS, harboring their storage, their network connectivity, their CPU and their RAM, and then sticking this in front of it. So immediately, and we'll go through this later in the software section, what the hell is this bringing that you can't just run on Windows on an old PC anyway? A device like this is going to live and die based on its software. The hardware's nice, pretty robust, lovely screen, although I'm not sure what it does. But ultimately, it's the software and utility of something like this that you are paying for, the convenience. And that word convenience, you're going to hear that a lot today, because I've got this connected to USB here via my Windows 11 machine. This is a Windows 11 laptop that I've been using for a few years, and I'm transitioning away from this to a brand new one alongside my Mac. Alongside that, I've connected an external USB drive, but this device I've connected and gave it access to the main C drive in there. Now, you might not do that. You might just get a system with some Billy Basic version of Windows or something else, and you just want to use it as targeted storage and for sharing. More on that later on. But one of the ways in which you may well share it is taking advantage of the mobile app. Now, we'll get to that later on, but I would argue the mobile application feels a lot more finished than the desktop client app. The desktop client app does well, but I would argue the mobile app, so in other words, the utility and what you, the end user, and your family and colleagues are going to use, certainly feels a little bit more fluid. But here on screen, we've got a little breakdown from the official pages about what it can and can't do, but I would argue some of these features, like some of the AI stuff there, certainly is not finished, at least in the software revision I'm using. Again, this is a pre-release prototype, this is pre-crowdfunding, this is pre-everything. And hopefully later on, we'll see how this video goes down or whether you guys want to see it. A week before the end of the crowdfunding, we'll return to this device and properly dig into what exactly has changed so that some of you can know whether this is still a product that you might want to back down crowdfunding. But if you install the application, I've gone for the Windows app here, but again, iOS, that kind of stuff, it's all there. The standard password entry there, I'm going for the local access protocol, but you can take advantage of remote access there if you choose to, using some of the online stuff. But do bear in mind, if you are going to do that, there doesn't seem to be any two-factor authentication, and that really bums me out. I'd like to have seen two-factor there. But you find a device on a local area network via your network controller for the other devices, but internally the device is found here, as you can see, via the USB with the power going in. So we go in and we've got the app. From here, if we go to the system settings, what becomes abundantly clear is all of the hardware management is unsurprisingly local. That's the CPU of this PC, that is the storage of this PC. I've targeted that 8 TB drive inside this laptop with very little left. The network information is the network controller of this PC, the CPU memory, all of it is just local. So the hardware roof, as it were, is whatever you're going to put this in. This little device doesn't seemingly bring any hardware oomph to the table there. So how that's going to impact some of the AI services, if your CPU is going to have a lovely little Terra operation set in there or not, who's to say? But at the very least, we go into the hardware settings there. You can take advantage of wireless drivers as well. So if you've got a Wi-Fi connection or a wired, you can go between those. If you do want to set up remote access, the option is there for you. And again, once you have given this device a network identity, that can be picked up. Again, local area network with other devices. And you can manage and play around with some of those network settings there. Not a huge amount, but you can. Again, because I've barred this from any external entry there, you are going to see the odd red flag in those areas. That's me, not the software. But I will argue, although you can create users, not only does it bum me out that I can't create two-factor authentication for them, something I would have liked to have seen, but on top of that, when it comes to remotely accessing the device, we can't enable things like Samba. We can't access much more than that. If we go in, for example, into file sharing, we can enable WebDAV, and yes, I'm aware that I'm using a Windows system and therefore Samba or SMB is native. The idea that I can't control the Samba settings within the software, and therefore when other users accessing this on a local area network for other users being other maybe client backup NAS devices there, I would have liked to have been able to manage and some of the Samba stuff, as well as perhaps turning some of the storage areas on this local area device here into different pools of storage and cutting them up a little bit. The closest you'll get to that is going into the file manager there and creating different shared storage areas, public spaces, private spaces, or on the local computer, as you can see with that USB drive, accessing some of the other connected storage on this. But these are only areas that you can access via the file manager, and only the storage that you target at the beginning is the storage that can be used more broadly by the whole system and the apps and services. So there are good and bad things behind that in terms of access and privacy, I guess. But you shouldn't really be running this on a primary system. This should really be on reusing old tech and a tertiary system at most. Even secondary might be a little bit close, maybe as an additional backup target with very little admin access beyond that. The App Center is actually pretty impressive. Now, I use the word impressive in a very contextually important way, because there isn't a huge number of apps, but that's okay. Because it would have been really easy, given that these are containerized, and yes, you can run Docker on this, that within this application to install Docker on your client system. Because remember, this PC is doing the work, not this. With that Docker, you could go into the containerization, you could go into the repos, and you could just go ahead, if you chose, to just install a myriad of different repository containerized applications there. And it would have been real easy for this brand to just list hundreds and hundreds of installable apps, which would have been quite worrying on your client hardware. This, at the very least, they've curated these apps, and therefore they know these ones work. And I've tested a few of them. So Jellyfin, for example, working like a charm. I've already gone in and set up, and it's allowed me to create a very easy, convenient Jellyfin media server here on this PC. Again, I could have just installed the Jellyfin app in the Windows App Center or just downloaded it online. But if you do that after all of the individual apps and services, then you're sort of misunderstanding the convenience of this. But again, prototype, we still don't know to what extent these are vetted, these applications and services. But if you're looking for something easy, for example, if you do want to install OpenClaw, right now, it only seems to have the Chinese agent Minimax as a supported pre-configured model. Hopefully they will address and add other ones in there, your Open AI, Gemini, stuff like that. But it is going to be a very convenient way to install OpenClaw and therefore an AI agent on reusing old hardware. Again, very dependent on your client hardware, the tera operating per second, stuff like that. But at the same time, it also has a surveillance tool. Now, the surveillance tool is definitely WIP work in progress there. So, for example, if we try and run the camera, here in the background, we've got the video stream, and that's a camera that's just off there. But the frame rate is low, and it's not really processing a lot of the camera actions that well. That said, that's only when I'm accessing the camera, because while I've been talking, and for early parts of today, has been storing those recordings. Not for a vast amount of time, I've changed over to a different camera to get it done, but at the very least it was recording these areas for me, and you can access these recordings for surveillance, and it has support of just general on-BIF cameras, and no licenses. But again, I wouldn't expect licenses given this very early state of this device right now. But moving beyond that, you can go into the other apps and services. So the file manager, remember we are running this software within Windows in this case. So we've already got Windows Explorer, and you can use a lot of Windows own sharing capabilities if you choose. But this is just rolling it all in to a NAS OS here running as an application. And from here, there's pretty much everything you're going to need, from sharing, whether that is the remote level access or on the local area network. But I didn't see an option where I could only bar this, for example, with the locally created users in the user market. So when I go in there, if I go ahead and create some brand new users, yes, I'm still annoyed about the lack of two-factor authentication, but I wish there was an option to only limit access to these files that I share with those users. Again, there's going to be other people that maybe do want to share it with the wide world, and good for you. But having that one door or the other option would have been nice. From there, you can encrypt them if you choose to, and that is to access the encrypted storage area. So I have created an encrypted 256-bit encryption storage there. So let's go in. I bet I've typed that wrong. Yes, I have. Once you go in to the encrypted storage area, from there, it allows you to dump those files in nice and easy and accessible. And these are still being stored here on the local file that is being created on your Windows system, but they are still encrypted. Again, there's stuff that you can do in Windows anyway, but it's the idea that these are all being presented in this single bubble here to be managed like any NAS operating system with their own file management tools for compaction, opening up, file deduplication natively being built in here. Again, that is ad hoc, that's not running in the background there. So for example, FX test folder there, you can go ahead, scan it. I know there's a couple of dupes in there and it's found them. So from there, I can go ahead and delete the dupes that I don't need. And that's what it'll do. And you can run that across files and folders that you've already got on the system. Again, there are dedupe tools available in the market you can install on your client system, but this is about including them all in this NAS bubble here. And for convenience sake, and bringing a lot of that utility. Not going to be for everyone, but I do think there is an appeal for this rather early 2000s idea being presented in a 2026 fashion, something I know I'm repeating. So then go to the video station, the ability to host our media server. So if you didn't want to use MB or Jellyfin or a containerized version of Plex, you can go ahead in here and with your media on this device, you can serve it up as a media server, and from there, even use the movie database, for example, for scraping metadata, the libraries, all that kind of stuff, all integrated neatly there. You can get it from the App Center, or you can get it from within this. But one thing I find very interesting is this, the remote desktop application. And we'll come back to this later on. But this allows you, with the connected device, to host your system, the connected device, as a KVM. Now, the idea of this serving as a KVM, I find very intriguing as someone that's monitored a lot of KVMs recently. Now, it is using standard Windows Remote Desktop. Again, it's just repurposing what's already there. And because I've not allowed for the device to have external access, I'm only having it running on the local area right now. This means that the amount of connection I've got to it is going to be limited. But This might be a nice, convenient little weird extra for a much easier setup of Windows remote connection. Not significantly easier, because it's actually got easier in recent years, but still, that is going to probably be appealing to some users. Interestingly, when you set the device up, it actually creates a virtual Ethernet adapter here in the background running at 10 gigabits per second there. Now that is, of course, what is being connected there via a USB 3.2 Gen 2 cable, again, 10 gigabit. But it's interesting to see it doing that. So clearly data is being exchanged back and forth with this device, something I am going to be digging into more there. But at the very least right now, it's doing something because data is being exchanged. But of course, this isn't via the local area network or the internet. This is literally being exchanged between the device and the connected USB. So data packets are being exchanged in some form. And presumably the sent data might well have been just software updates to the device to update its OS. I think it was around 300 to 400 megabytes per second in the latest revision. But again, I need to reiterate, this transmission of data is not data that is being exchanged with the wider internet. This is just being exchanged back and forth between the connected USB device and the client. So ultimately, it still means that it is your network driver and your network adapter, and indeed the cloud gateway that you have in your home or business environment, that is in charge of what can and cannot get through. Again, we've already talked about the safe box. We can talk about the photo album there. The options are there. I do wish some of the AI stuff was better integrated, or indeed integrated at all. But at least on the client side of things, it's a little rudimentary right now, but there is still features and services here that can be run within your own existing hardware. I just question right now about just how far and how complete a lot of these apps and services actually are. But once we switch to the mobile application, I would argue things, again, feel a lot more polished. At the bottom of the screen there, you can see that the mobile phone backup, I have paused it, but there's a lot of configuration and options there in order for us to back up our mobile devices, again, with different user admin or non-admin credential created to back up our mobile devices, our tablets, our whatever, to this new semi-NAS hosted device with that FanX Drive X3 connected. So you can run those. Alongside that, you can go ahead and monitor and access the data that's on there. Again, how much of the AI stuff we're still waiting to see. But what's interesting is being able to monitor a lot of the PC stuff there, as well as some of the NAS stuff, and take advantage of arguably a better suited and better laid out collection of apps and services running on the connected system. But as you can see right now, this is where I get real intrigued, because from here is when we can access that PC with remote connection. Again, they didn't invent this, they're already using a remote desktop to get the job done. But it's the idea that in a native NAS appliance, I can now set up remote access to this PC system, and then from there, start browsing around. So I can go ahead and just start making my way into Windows like normal. So let's go ahead to the top there, let's have a quick look, go down to Windows at the bottom, scroll along, use the mouse, move some of those config options around. We can play around, we can get some stuff done. It's very hard to show you this on the screen facing the way it is. And it doesn't feel as smooth as, say, a GLI Net KVM, but it's the fact this has been easily set up and set up within 2 clicks that I think some users will find appealing. From there, managing the device itself, finding out a lot more system information is all accessible there, and adding some of the other bells and whistles and other apps and services is all easy to do. Accessing that secure vault with the key that you've created earlier on, managing some of the different shares there between different devices that you can manage from the mobile remotely on the connected X3 desktop client appliance there. The options are there. It feels a little bit more completed, I would argue, than what we've seen before. And really, I do think of reutilizing old hardware that you have in your own possession right now, this is not a bad idea. I just think there's still a ways to go. There's still, for example, we go into it there. Let's go back to that previous option with permission management. A lot of these are locked onto my mobile device, but I want to be able to add two-factor authentication. I want to be able to limit things on this system and this software if I'm going to start mounting a client machine into something remotely accessible by lots of different users. I wish this software, for example, had that ability to add multiple drives into a RAID. That would have been great. And If you've ever tried setting up multiple drives in a RAID in Windows, you'll know what an absolute pain in the arse that is using disk management. It would have been great if they could have added feature sets for me to RAID up multiple drives on this Windows machine a lot more easily with this software and more conveniently. This is a device built on convenience, and sometimes it feels convenient and sometimes it doesn't. But because the device isn't finished yet, I feel like I can't truly critique it because of that. Critiquing a prototype that's going to be different from what everyone else gets, that's a fool's errand. But what about the hardware? What's going on under the bonnet? I think we can all universally agree, as we went through that software section just now, this software doesn't feel finished. It still looks like it needs more time in the oven, and it doesn't look like it's ready for retail. But to FanX's credit, they're not saying it is. This is a prototype. This is an unfinished prototype, and the software we saw, I don't even think is even at beta stage right now. What we're looking at right now is a solution in development, and we've got to judge it like that. And from what I have seen, this seems like a nifty, convenient way to add a surveillance application, add OpenClaw, Jellyfin, MB, Smart Home services, adding a mobile client that allows you to manage and back up multiple devices, each with their individual login, each with their individual paths, remote access or local only, an encrypted drive protocol, remote access via their own relay services, and the ability to install Docker applications to do it your own way. Again, with that Docker deployment, they're still utilizing the hardware assets of your client system. The limit of what this thing can do is still going to come down to the reused, recycled piece of hardware that you're connecting this to. It's not a bad idea. Arguably, it's a little bit of an early 2000s idea being deployed with the convenience of a 2025-2026 deployment. But it's not going to be for everyone. Hell, it's not even for me. But I do know there are people out there that think for 100 nicker to turn an existing system with a bit of Billy Basic storage inside into something a little bit more usable, be it as a targeted next stage backup or even more than that for multimedia, this is quite a nifty idea, and it's convenience. You're paying for convenience. Because we can't lie to ourselves and say that most of those apps and services that I listed there, you can't find with an amalgamation of iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac OS and Linux tools. You could pull all of these things from different repos and get to the same result using an old system. But it won't be as convenient. You'll need to know what you're doing. There could be conflicts, permission issues, and inconvenience, and that's what this is trying to do and resolve. But as I say, it's not for everyone. Notwithstanding, you are effectively paying $99 for a lock and key. Not only do you have to trust that lock and key, but also when we open this up, there is not much underneath this enclosure. We've got magnetic plates in there related to using this in MagnaLink and also attaching, as well as utilizing it, of course, with that NFC, something I wasn't really able to explore. The LCD does feel like it's not doing much, and maybe in a future update, more can be done with that. It's low powered, but ultimately inside, of course it's low powered. It's effectively one PCB with a ribbon for the LCD display, a chip for the USB, and a couple more chips inside related to that SoC and just keeping things running. So how much of this is necessary, I think, is a question we have to ask ourselves. But at $99, I do think it's a very convenient solution, but it's not finished. It is on crowdfunding and there's still a ways to go. Make sure you are aware of these three things and you keep these three things in mind before you engage with something like this. I am going to keep an eye on this and I'm going to keep monitoring those updates, and if and when this does go to crowdfunding, I might make a follow-up video about how much has changed between now and 1 week before the end of that crowdfunding for everyone. Again, we'll see if you guys want to hear about that. But I like that this exists. I do, because A lot of us have got old tech lying around for good or for bad, and the idea that I can conveniently reuse that without having to learn command line, without having to get my hands dirty with TrueNAS, without having to learn a bunch of stuff, I know is going to appeal to people. Not me, but it will appeal to others. So let's talk about it below in the comments. Again, if the crowdfunding is now live, I'll link to it below. Otherwise, I'll link to a bunch of resources from the brand themselves below to learn more. But thank you so much for watching. Again, check it out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.